You made in your own head. Look who we got here!
And welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel Leader, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Care, and this is where truth and real talk occurs. But before we enter into our discussion, I'd like to once again let you know we're here with my two co-hosts. Father Lucas is not here today because he's on an assignment, and hopefully he'll be back with us shortly. But first of all, we have Julian Harper.
Welcome, welcome.
And second of all, we have Michael Graves, a.k.a. Big Mike.
Namaste.
And we're very blessed once again to have our attorney at law, attorney Maddox is here with us today. Brother, welcome once again. He's a family member. We might as well say our co-host, our fourth co-host as well. And today we're going to critique what's happening with the Dominic Strauss-Kahn case. For those who don't know, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, who was the former chief of the IMF and candidate for the presidency of France, was arrested for attempting to sexually abuse or attempting to rape a worker in a hotel in Manhattan. Since the Manhattan District Attorney's Office made the arrest and he was subsequently indicted by a grand jury, it appears as if the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Cyrus Vance, is attempting, along with the press and the attorneys for the defendant, Dominic Strauss, to unravel his own case. Our organization had a press conference denouncing Cyrus Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney, who some of you might have been fooled enough to vote for, stating that he should not dismantle this case and besmirch a victim of a sexual abuse attack character. Unfortunately, he has done that. So we have our expert, Attorney Alton Maddox, who's going to break it down and tell us how he sees the way this case is going. Brother, once again, welcome. And why don't you, start off wherever you want to as it relates to this case and the dual victimization of our system.
Well, I think the way you really start in this case is the way you really start any case. And I hope the second phase we'll discuss later. But the first phase is really an analysis of how the system works. When a black woman makes an allegation of rape against a white man, and that's just been very consistent. When I heard about this case in May, I knew the outcome first. It was just a question of the strategy and tactics that the prosecutor's office is going to use in order to reach the outcome. But the outcome is always the same. And in many ways, the things that bring about that is also the same, because you have a situation where, and I say this, and I think people somehow think that it's old school for me to say it, But the reality of it is that everything that is governed by the slave codes, and that's just a reality. People say, "Well, you don't go past slavery." Well, you don't go past slavery, but they have. So they have the same structure because you stay with what you win. Just like football, you got to win a formula. That you run those plays that get you to the goal line. You just don't change them up. And right now, there's no need for changing after 400 years. And so I think the first thing we have to understand how the whole system works. In these cases, you find the same thing. All these cases, you find defamation of the complainant witness. That happened with the Warner Brawley. That happened with the Duke Cross case. That's happening now with this case where you defame the person. In defaming the person, you also diminish the person's credibility, where it makes it difficult for everybody to believe that the person can support the case. And you go through the whole question of aggressive attorneys going after them if they are aggressive. In the Duke Cross case, you had the prosecutor, which was very unprecedented, Mike Knifebaum, who came forward and said, "I'm prosecuting this case. Don't put this guy behind bars." Well, ultimately, he had to go because he became the problem. You had Tawana Brawley. Ultimately, I had to go. I became the problem because the real question is no representation is permitted. And so what we saw here in this case is at the end, you had the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which was acting as an adversary and smearing this woman, even though she was his client. And therefore, he violated the Code of Professional Responsibility. And I think one of the things that has to be done here is that the disciplinary authorities have to investigate his own conduct. Because if Mike Knifebaum can be disbarred for supposedly undermining the rights of the accused, the district attorney's office certainly be disciplined for undermining the rights of his client. That obviously is not his position. Now, given that, the next thing to become automatic is there's a need for a special prosecutor. Because any time that an attorney acts inconsistent with the interests of the client, and in this case, a public prosecutor, then obviously the governor has to take over. So that's a whole another dimension. So even before people start wondering about, well, what is he going to do next week? We shouldn't do anything because he shouldn't even be on the case. See, so we shouldn't even be waiting on what he's going to do because he should be so bogged down now in the governor removing him for his own conduct. Because you got to remember, these are grand jury proceedings that he's leaking. They're leaking information from the grand jury, which is a felony. You can't leak what goes on the grand jury. That's the reason why defense attorneys don't get all that material there. Because it is prohibited. You see what I'm saying? So we're missing a lot of points here. In terms of how we have to really go about proceeding in this case. And then you have the whole question of the grand jury itself. This is not a prosecutor's information. There are two types of accusatory instruments that are employed. The prosecutor can file his own prosecutor's information, or the prosecutor can go before the grand jury and file the grand jury request for an indictment. That's what they did. Now, you can't undo what somebody else did. See, that doesn't mean the prerogative. If you go before the grand jury, it's not you who accuses Strauss-Kahn. It's the grand jury. You can't undo that. And what is more interesting, if you examine the criminal procedure law, there is no ground under the criminal procedure law for this prosecutor at this stage to abort this indictment. None.
You said no ground?
There's no grounds. There are absolutely no grounds at this stage. So this whole fear is result out of ignorance. On the part of our own community not being properly counseled, and on the part of the media engaging in a propaganda campaign of misinformation and disinformation. But there is absolutely no basis. Anybody can go into criminal procedure law and look. There's no basis for any of the stuff that is taking place. And the only thing that they're doing is exploiting our ignorance. Because of the fact that they have so broken us down to the point where we don't have legal representation anymore. They can do anything. And this is exactly what Carter G. Wilson said. I was reading his book again, Miseducation Negro, on page 50. And somebody go in, he'll say, look, you get these rights, but if you get rid of the lawyers, you still don't have any right because nobody can counsel you as to what your rights are. And that's what they are anticipating now. That's what they're doing. They have systematically eliminated the right of representation for black people, and black people have systematically go along with it. And this becomes the drawing line as to where we are at this particular time. But there's absolutely no basis for him to even be in the case. And even if somebody wanted to take over the case, there will be no basis for them to dismiss it on these claims. Because you're not talking about here about credibility of witnesses to the point where it becomes, oh, wait a minute, I mean, credibility is always an issue. It's always an issue. I mean, so it doesn't prevent a case from going on, but it's always important for the jury to assess the credibility, to determine what truth lies, but it does not become a defense to the prosecution. There's nothing in the criminal procedure law that says the lack of credibility is a defense. You can't proceed in front. And you have to remember, we're talking about penal laws, and penal laws have to be strictly construed. So there ain't no wiggle room in these laws. You know, you don't just come up and just do what you want to do as though this is the wild, wild west, you know, and everything is acceptable. So there's a lot of discussion here, you know, and it gets to the point where, you know, we have to really, as a community, really get informed in this. And I basically, you know, I really try to stay away from these kind of things. I'm so far down to reading other things right now. But, you know, it gets to a point where this gets embarrassing. You know, and so even though I can't afford to be out here to deal with this, but also on the other hand, it just gets embarrassing to what Cyrus Van and Robert Morgenthau are doing. Because you're dealing with a prosecutor, you know, who has had his way for years. Morgenthau is still in office. All right, he's still in office. And C. Vernon Mason and Calvin Butts can tell you, he called me in his office once. I asked them to go down there with me after they realized that I was serious about meeting with me. And when we met, he told Mason and Dr. Butts both that this man seemed not to have understood who I am. See, everybody else has, but he hasn't. And I'm going to give him one final warning to cut it out, or he will be subject to a criminal prosecution. And I was. When Michael Stewart came up, I was prosecuted. You know, if I had been convicted, I would have gone immediately to jail. I would have lost the license to practice law at that time because Morgenthau had stacked the deck. And not only had he framed me, but he also brought in a judge who was on the outs, and this is how they do it. And that's why I say this whole thing is systematic. He brought this judge in, and the judge was on the outs, on the ropes, and the only way he could get back in good graces was to get a conviction. And he failed. I mean, he instructed the jury that I was guilty in total violation of the law. He did everything. But they didn't care what the instruction was because they knew once they got the conviction, no appellate court was going to look at it. Period. So if you lose before the jury, that's it. I, unfortunately, was able to convince the jury, you know, and so as a result of that, I wasn't, you know, sentenced, convicted, or whatever the case might be, but that's how they play ball.
But let me interject real quick. Now, Morgenthau had a problem with you, primarily because you insisted on representing individuals from our community against his office, and you were very successful.
Right.
So the political game behind a lot of attorneys is that when the district attorney wants a particular case, as in this case, the attorney is supposed to fall back and hand his client over.
Must fall back. You know, in all those situations, must fall back and hand them over. But you got to realize this. Linda Fairstein was on TV today. You know, and she done botched the Central Park and all that. But these people's careers are at stake. But you don't advance your career by losing. You know, I don't care who you are. You're not a search for the truth. It's a search for victory. All right. So if you're in the prosecutor's office, the more notches that you have on your weapon, all right, the better off you are. You know, that's how it works. You're like a gunslinger. You know what I mean? They look at your gun and see how those marks. Right. You know, they go, wow, you got it pretty rough. You know what I mean? If you ain't got no marks, you know, ain't nobody taking you serious. Right. So, you know, when you get ready to go in a courtroom, it's a real battle. You know, and usually the state has everything stacked up against you because they can yank your license if that's what they choose to do. And in nearly every instance, that's what's going to happen. You know, I mean, and when I saw this case here, and I saw the lawyer meeting with the prosecutor's office for 3 hours, you know, I knew then in my own mind that they had read him the Riot Act. And the Riot Act in this case is the Maddox warnings. And it had been read before. It was read to Arthur Lewis and everything else. Yes. And Arthur Lewis told me later that they brought him in and said, look, when we want somebody, we want Leroy Nelson. You stood up against us in the state. We're going to bring a federal case now. We want this boy behind bars. And if you don't do it, you know, it's the Maddox warnings. He told me too. All right? That's true. You know, I mean, that's what happens here. Maddox is the president, and anybody who gets out of line now will follow automatic because he didn't do what he was told to do. You know, and when you don't do that, it's all over. We'll give you another case later down the road. But when we want a case, we want it. They wanted Limerick Nelson. They wanted a bunch of others. They want this case. You know, this guy, you got to remember, this guy is an international financier. He has a lot of juice. And whatever may have happened from the beginning with the grand jury, see, because this could have been a runaway grand jury. This didn't necessarily have to be 5 bands. You see, this didn't have to be them at all. It could have been, once they gave the instructions to that jury, the jury said, later for the prosecutor. You know what I mean? We're going to indict this ham.
Now, when you talk about a runaway jury, remember Morgenthau called, what is the officer, Del Devio, because he didn't want to prosecute Del Devio for shooting Desmond Roberts and the black police officer in the back. So when he made a weak presentation to the grand jury and they indicted Del Devio, even the Manhattan District Attorney said this was a runaway jury.
Yeah, they thought, but that's exactly what happened. When you get a runaway jury, you know what I mean? I mean, they may decide, hey, we will do our own thing, which is why Sarbanes has no reason there to be talking about watching this case because he didn't call it. If he had wanted to call it, because he had to charge the prosecutor's information. He could have proceeded that way. That would have been his call. He went to the grand jury. The grand jury saw it differently. And they chose to indict him. That's what happened. Not that Sarbanes wanted to happen, but that's what happened, and that's what we're looking at now.
Now, Brother Alton, you're describing a power relationship. Now, with respect to that power relationship, is the black community, as it's presently constructed, poised or prepared to fight Morgenthau or fight Vance, to fight that district attorney's office, because it's the most powerful district attorney's office in the country? Now, is the black community, as we know it, prepared, and twofold, is the black community poised or prepared, and is black elected or selected officials prepared for that battle?
Okay, well, as far as the black community is concerned, the black community has substantial interest in this case because this is not a private case. This is the people of the state of New York. And so, you know, if you want to sue somebody privately, like an assault or something like that, well, that's just between you and the party that you're suing. But when you're ready to deal with criminal cases, you're dealing with public offenses, not private offenses. These are public offenses. The question becomes then, does the public have standing to raise objections? And the answer is yes. And see, this is what is not being said or done now. The weapon that should be done already, there should be a lawsuit in the form of an Article 78 against the Manhattan District Attorney's Office by certain people who feel aggrieved by what he's proposing to do, because in a Article 78 proceeding, especially in the nature of a writ of prohibition, the prosecutor is acting in excess of his authority. And that should be put in check in a lawsuit filed by persons who live in the state, who have interest in the criminal justice system in the state, and the outcome of various proceedings. That should be done. The other things I said before, there has to be a call for special prosecutor, the same thing. This man cannot continue to represent or misrepresent Ms. Diallo. He cannot do that because it is in violation of the Code of Professional Responsibility. Nobody's ever seen a prosecutor smear their own client. I mean, that's just law 101. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. You cannot smear your own client. If it gets to the point where you have to smear your own client, you should withdraw, hand the case to somebody else, and let them look at it. But for you to take the aggressive position of smearing your client and undermining credibility, or in some cases misstating the fact and leaking grand jury information to the public, I mean, all of this is clearly in violation of law. And these are things that the community has to aggressively jump on right now.
When we talk about the jury, the grand jury proceedings, and we talk about the actual trial, when we talk about how judges charge juries, how the DA's office present the case during the grand jury, that has a major effect on how or what the outcome of these cases may or may not be. In this particular case, when we talk about the district attorney's office giving a haphazard or a very lackadaisical position when they're talking about charging the jury, and we find that the grand jury indicted this particular case, how is it that it's is it really far-fetched, or is this really outside of the norm when we're looking at a DA saying or making it appear as if this or there isn't enough evidence for him to proceed with this particular case? Is this really like outside the norm or really outside the box?
Well, usually, in the reality of it, we know that, and this has been widely accepted, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. So generally, you routinely expect prosecutors to be able to do that. Now, there have been instances, even before now, in which that just hasn't occurred. That's what happened with Michael Stewart. The DA's office didn't want an indictment, and we aggressively pursued that and got people inside of the grand jury to do inside what we couldn't do, and that was to take matters in their own hands and to call for an indictment, which ended up being the prosecution of 11 cops, for beating Michael Stewart to death. Now, ultimately, it got back to the judicial system, but Atlas and others, took over, and they sort of let them squeeze out of it. But the reality of it is the people spoke and said, hey, these 11 birds need to stand trial, and stand trial they did, and it went all the way through. So, in the prosecutor's office, Marco did not want that indictment. Same thing, I'm sure he didn't want this indictment. And even though he may have tried to instruct the grand jury to do something else, they refused. They became what is called commonly a runaway grand jury, and they did the right thing.
Now, in this case, the DA is not really questioning the evidence. They're trying to imply that the victim no longer has credibility, and the credibility issues are not relative to this case. It's allegedly some immigration application that happened before. It's allegedly against a conversation she had with some is allegedly against her not filing taxes. So you can tell it's a beat up campaign. My question to you is I understand as an investigator, as someone who is prosecuting cases with the district attorney's office, that there's credibility issues with a victim related to that case, whether or not they're lying as it relates to that case, et cetera, et cetera. Here she has injuries, vaginal injuries, as well as she might need surgery on her shoulder. There's forensic evidence in the form of DNA. So there's enough evidence, and then you have a cooperating witness. So based on this so-called loss of credibility, was like you said, the press, the white press, has joined in the district attorney's office to act as if this credibility issue is enough not to continue prosecuting this case.
Well, the beautiful thing here is that I like the way you said that, because at some point we get a copy of this tape and go over it in greater detail and instructing the public about your wisdom. You actually phrased it correctly, because what you said is that there's no question here about the sufficiency of evidence, and that's important. That means that there's no question about the sufficiency of evidence that the case proceeds to trial. the credibility issues or issues that the jury themselves, as judges of the fact in the trial, have to decide. And you don't know which way they're going to decide because there's no instruction that the judge is going to give is that just because a witness may have lied, that will undermine the prosecution. The jury is told that is in your discretion. You see what I'm saying? So now what you're doing now, Vance is taking a progress of the judge away from the judge before the case goes to trial. Because now we're deciding, not we, but they're deciding, how the jury going to decide these credibility issues. And you don't know who's going to sit on that jury. And you can say, you can blow hot air, you can blow cold air, you can blow warm air, but hey, it's up to the jury to decide which air they want to go with. All right? And so, you can say, well, hey, they be inconsistent statement. There's been a lot of times that. And defense lawyers love for the inconsistent statement, but just because they are inconsistent statement does not mean that destroys the prosecution itself. And that's what is important. The prosecution of a case, the sufficient evidence is an issue totally different than credibility. And in this case, and this is what they know, meaning Strauss-Kahn, is the sufficient evidence is already there. They don't want to go to trial.
Exactly.
See, they don't want to go to trial. In this case, right around here talking about, I'll sue you on defamation. You don't want to sue nobody on defamation because you want to sue on defamation. You afraid that this outcome be the way you think or you argue that it will be. And then they say we won and now we're suing. But you can't end up where you're in doubt as to whether you might win or not. So you just selling your tickets. And unfortunately, there's nobody who's giving him the blood to say, hey, Chuck, let's see what you know. And let's ride this all the way. I mean, that's just what's not happening here. And until, you get some forceful people that can run up there and say, hey, we ain't buying this. Then this stuff is just going to happen. And that's what is lacking here. And that's what I don't see from her side because you have, on one hand, you got the prosecutor's office now who want to abandon the case. You got the complaining witness or the victim who want him to go to jail. And you got her lawyer who wants some money. Now that's some different interests.
Right.
And that jive is there. Now where's her representation? If your lawyer is trying to get money and you're trying to get justice, where's the representation?
Right. My question to you is if now I was able to witness slave castles, dungeons in Ghana that was built in the 1400s.
Okay.
And so they have, whites have been systematically capturing, killing, exploiting, and raping black women for 5 centuries, documented in the West. So if you look at 500 years, and you can only think of a case or two, maybe, where a white man went to jail for raping a black woman, the question is representation, and will there be fairness of law? And can you at least comment on should the case be thrown out because she had a conversation allegedly with an inmate in the federal penitentiary in Arizona? Does that somehow throw the case awry because she had a conversation supposedly with respect to compensation?
Well, no, because of the fact that the civil law provides for compensation. So I mean, why shouldn't you start adding up your figures? I mean, if you've been damaged, why wait later to try to figure out what you were damaged with earlier? You may forget. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, like in other words, if you have certain damages, the damage compensation and computation starts now. And why should there be some law against discussing that?
And it's only alleged that she had the conversation.
Yeah, she did.
Right.
I mean, that's my point. It's good that she did. That's my point. Because if you weren't thinking that way, something got to be wrong with you.
Does that ruin the case, though?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. People do that all every day. Because you can't damage somebody because they're taking advantage of the other side of the law.
Right.
That's a matter of right. So how can that have
So when Dominique Strauss-Kahn's lawyer is saying she's looking for money.
Good. She should get money.
Because they acting as if, well, she's wrong because she's looking for money.
No. She is absolutely entitled to money. That's what anybody. Now you are just like the guy that got the baseball up there at Yankee Stadium with Derek Jeter's 3,000 home run. I mean, 3,000 hit. Now the reality of it is that he could have been paid for it. He had to be paid for it, but he decided to just give it back.
Right.
You know what I mean? But he could have kept it, and nobody could have said anything about that. Same thing with this. If you want money, it's good. If you don't want money, it's good. It's the same thing. So how does that undermine your credibility because you want to be paid for being harmed?
But this just shows how the white press, and I don't call it the media because it's the white media, and we have to categorize it correctly. They're, like Michael Will stated, they're claiming or suggesting, and that's what they always do. They imply that her discussions, if she had discussions about monetary compensation, which if you remember OJ, when OJ Simpson was found innocent, the parents of Goodman, first thing they did was run the court, and everybody applauded. They attempt to suggest, along with the other misinformation, that there's something wrong with her, even that maybe this is what she was wanted all along. They want us to believe that she walked into a room, seen a naked white old man, and said, "I want him to put his penis in my mouth, bruise my vagina area, throw my shoulder out, and rip my clothing. This is what I want."
And you know what? In going after him, you want everything that he owns, including him being behind the ball. You want the whole 9 yards.
Exactly.
All right, and that's just only natural. There's nothing unnatural with that position.
All right, I'm sorry. Very quickly, the biggest problem I have is that with everything that's been presented, the bottom line is that she deserves her day in court. And that's what they're trying to avoid.
Absolutely.
So we can look at every aspect, and it's good that everyone looks at every aspect, but it should take place in a court of law where he was indicted.
Yeah, well, why they answer the same question with Strauss Conley answered to what if he hide?
Right, exactly.
All right, you want your day in court? Fine. That's the only way you can get it if you go to court. You can't try to circumvent it and stop it now. What are you hiding?
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what this is really all about, because he knows that this evidence is sufficient to be sending him to prison for a long period of time. And he knows that if it's not sufficient, that just the fact that it comes out in a court of law to what he really did is going to undermine whatever position he has in life.
Well, one of the questions now is the Cyrus Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, is he conspiring with the attorneys of DSK to get this out? We know DSK is his wife's family are very rich, and I know he's going to use any chip he has. Now, this is a man with chips. This is a man with economic, financial chips. He's going to use whatever chips he possibly can not to have this case go to trial, because, as you said, he stands a chance of being convicted, and with his age and the amount of time he's facing, that's the end of his life. Is also the fact that the chief executive in Cyrus Vance's office is married to one of the staff members of DSK, and the attorneys of the victim didn't know this, that Cyrus Vance, his chief prosecutor, third in control, is married to somebody, one of the attorneys on the DSK side. We call for a special prosecutor. We're the only one to call for that.
Yeah, well, that's a conflict.
Right.
I mean, that's a conflict. I mean, say to him what you want about. 48 hours after she had been found, the state, federal, local law enforcement agencies were all converged on her house, interviewing her. See, nobody ever talked about this interview. All right, and then when they said Tawana went out, she did come. With all of these agencies, from the federal government to the state government to the local government, all present, all asking questions. Well, guess what? Nearly 10 years later at trial, guess what we found out? The FBI agent was a female who was Pagonis' girlfriend.
On the side.
You understand what I'm saying? But yeah, we gotta make a big point of this now. You gotta make a big issue out of this now. Because this is wrong. And this is how they play ball. They stick anybody in there. And they act like it's alright. It ain't alright. You know what I mean? And that's why when you play hardball, you gotta go inch by inch. And not let anybody get away with anything. And that's why I say it's clear that this case, that this is a justification for this man to be removed from this case first. That's the first thing that has to happen, because he is acting in a way that no prosecutor has ever acted before in terms of engaging in a smear campaign, unless he was a prosecutor out of Ku Klux Klan's Clapper. And that's the only way you can explain this, because there's no other way. How is he protecting her by leaking information in violation of the law against her. And that's what he's doing.
Now, what about some of the individuals say, before we go out phone callers, that if he have any disparaging information about a victim, that he's supposed to release that information to the defense attorney?
No, that's not true. That's not true. Because, you see, the way that Brady, and that's what we really call Brady material, Brady is not now as liberally construed as we would like. I mean, and so there's a case called Brady versus Maryland. And basically what Brady says is that if you have any exculpatory evidence, not impeaching, see, that's a big difference. If you have any exculpatory evidence, you can release that at some point.
Now, why don't you define the difference for the audience?
Sure. Exculpatory evidence means something that would tend to get you off. That would tend to say, well, you just went in the room, you didn't do that, you was in a straight jacket, you know what I mean, or you were sexually impotent, or whatever the case might be. But you didn't do it. That's what exculpatory evidence would amount to.
They're supposed to release that.
If it was exculpatory, bro.
And what's impeachment?
But impeachable evidence is something that tends to show that you may have made a statement that might be false, which is not exculpatory. That's a total difference. And so here you have a case where clearly, at most, it might be an impeachment, but it's not exculpatory. Under no circumstance, it doesn't undermine the sufficiency of the evidence in any respect. I mean, whatever you may have, you may want to give, but it doesn't take away from the fact that what happened in that room is an issue that should be decided by a jury, and not under the guise of exculpatory evidence getting you out of court before you have your day.
So now, what does this say to you about Cyrus Vance releasing impeachable or
again, it shows you that he's working against the interest of his client, which is why he should not be. I mean, this is not a difficult case. You know what I mean? This is not a difficult issue. I mean, for somebody who knows the law, this is not a difficult issue as to what he has done and how he has breached his constitutional duties. I mean, this is not difficult, you know, because he has clearly done that, and you can't show any other cases where a prosecutor has behaved in this manner.
So he's taking advantage of the ignorance of the black community.
That's what he's doing.
And the lawyers that do know better are not saying it.
Not saying a mumbling word.
Wow. All right. We have callers on the line. We want to hear more from our attorney at law. But first caller, where you calling from? Okay. Otep, quick question or comment for our guests.
All right. I'll be real quick. What up, gentlemen? Ultimate, my questions are for you. Number one, do you think if she loses her criminal case is undermined, will she be able to have a powerful civil suit? And now that we know Cy Vance is a crony, can he be I don't know, disbarred as well, or be kicked off, or will he be re-elected? And also, one more question. What is the status of the Freedom Party and you and Charles Bear? And is Bob Law taking the center front of that? I was thinking, I love you, Otep, and I'm saying Noel, Brother Julian, Father Lucas, Veronica, we love you, Otep. They cannot stop us, and informing what happened to that young lady. And also,
okay, brother, that's enough, brother. That's enough. I hope you remember the questions.
As it relates to the first question that you raised about the outcome of a criminal prosecution and having some effect on a civil matter, just simply let me say that can be answered by the quantum of evidence that is required in a criminal case as opposed to a civil case. And so, in a criminal case, the proof is reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it's the purpose of the evidence. So it's very likely that you can have a case where you lost, in in other words,
O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, and you can turn around and have a civil action, because the quantum of evidence, burden of proof, is different in both of those cases. In the second matter, let me something to say that I think is rather tragic, that we're caught up in a situation with Charles Barron, Bob Palmer, and Bob Law and G2, all of whom I know very well, but they absolutely, in my opinion, are not acting honorably, not because of some of the things that they did otherwise, but because of the fact that, look, again, the people came out and gave the Freedom Party 45,000 signatures, which was sufficient to put it on the ballot. Then, after that, people went to the polls. Now, there is no prior case where a party got 45,000 signatures and then get 50,000 votes. And that's what they're telling us. Now, my problem is that, and maybe the next time we just have to really play this out, is that I thought it would be automatic that Charles would say, because he was the gubernatorial candidate, that yes, I demand a recount, I demand to look into it, I demand to go to Washington to file a federal complaint, I demand to go to the state to do all these things, none of which he did. The only person that did all of that was me. All right? Now, see, for people to have gone out and voted, and for people to have put that much money in the Freedom Party, and Charles just simply said, well, hey, leave it alone. I don't want to challenge the police. I don't want to know what the truth is. I'm willing to do whatever I'm doing now. I think that's wrong. Because what he is not taking into consideration is the rights of the people. And there were people all over this state who worked their bonds off for the Freedom Party. And they should have been the ones to make that decision. Unfortunately, the way that the election law is written, it's the gubernatorial candidate that has standing. Not the party, but the gubernatorial candidate, especially a party that's trying to get ballot status. And that's why we're caught up in this. He has refused to challenge the police, and that's where I think the real problem is, because he is not taking consideration that you have people that put a lot of money into this. And they put a lot of time into this, put a lot of effort in it. I was all over the state. I mean, nobody's spending much money as I did. I went to every county, everywhere else.
When you say the police, Brother Alton, I think the people need to understand the relationship between the police department and the Board of Elections.
Yeah. And also talk about the 190,000 votes that was discovered, not counted.
Not counted. Right, in the last election. See, at the end of and this, I remember who was there. I always say you need to read a book from the end. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
And go back to the beginning. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We had no kind of discussion. You know what I mean? Because if we had read the end of the book first,
right?
All right,
we would be in this position.
We would be in this situation because the end of the book shows you where things go. Because the police department gets the votes, counts the votes, gives a return over to the Associated Press. All right, and then you get that information, and so that's what happened here, and for Charles and everybody else, we don't want to challenge that. It's crazy to me. You know what I mean? How can we look? Charles and I went all the way back to the Black United Front, okay? And we were involved in congressional hearings on police brutality. I represented the Black United Front in various cases involving the police. I mean, how do you not trust the police when all along we did? And that's what the problem is with that. And they tend to now try to hold on to it, and we got to try to find a way to wiggle it away from them, in a way that we won't be entertaining white folks. Because the other side is they like to see us fight each other. You know what I mean?
Now, what about the 190 votes?
And the 190 votes is another matter because that was never explained. It was explained that they had 190,000 votes, but it was counted. Right, that was not counted and never became counted. All right, and so, how many times you have an election, you got 190,000 votes, and nobody ever counted, and you're not concerned about what those votes could have done for this campaign. I know that this campaign was the way it was, because you got to remember, in 1992, the Senate election put Reverend Sharp on the map, and I gave him the formula for how to become what he had become.
Who ran the campaign?
Yeah, I ran the campaign.
You ran the campaign?
I ran the campaign. I put the whole thing together.
Okay.
Unfortunately, now he has become what we didn't want. He has definitely become what we did not want. Okay, but at that particular time, it was a similar situation. We got over 175,000 votes back in 1992. I know what happens in campaign. I have a feel for how many votes you really got. Even Shopping will tell you himself that at the end of the campaign, him and Michael Hart and others were saying, man, we can get 50,000 votes. We'll be happy. And I said to them, Sharpton, you're going to get at least 150,000 votes. He ended up getting 175,000. All right? So, and we didn't have no canvassing. We didn't have no polling, anything like that. But I have a feel for the number of votes the campaign has generated. And I'm telling you that the Freedom Party, Charles knows this, I know this, anybody else who got a chicken brain cell knows this, that party should be on the ballot now as a party with ballot access. And that's rather unfortunate because we will be in a different boat now.
All right. Thank you. Next caller, welcome to Community Copy. We're going to come with our phone calls, so keep them coming. Where you calling from, caller? Okay, quick question or comment for our guests.
Just quick three questions. One, the sister's currently doing interviews with ABC News. Is that helping her or hurting her position? Two, why don't we have a recall vote on Vance and get him out of office? Why we gotta wait for the next election? And three, how do we get rid of these archaic laws that go back post-slavery, pre-slavery, and change the law in New York State? And I was addressing these three questions to our attorney at war.
Okay, thank you for the call. And then Studio, can you turn the mic up down here? Because I'm not sure if they can hear the questions on the TV, but
yeah, I think one of the three questions was in terms of how we get rid of that kid law. That was like the last question. And that's very important because what we're gonna have to do as a people is realize that some of these laws that are currently on the books in New York were also on the books during slavery. I mean, and nobody, we've gotten people we put in office, but ain't nobody sanitized these laws. All right? So you have a situation where, as he said, this is having a tremendous impact on the way that we see things. So that has to come in terms of black people calling for a convention and just literally going through these laws because there are some laws that are constantly killing us. And we fail to realize one thing. Dr. King's whole movement was about changing laws. Because that's what this whole struggle is about. I mean, Obama now, he's in a budget deficit problem, but he got to deal with laws. He got to find out where you increase to allow for more latitude in getting credit, or he got to think about budget balancing, how do you balance a budget and that whole bit. But everything it relates to law. If you got a bad law in the book, they're going to produce bad results. Right. So what this brother said is absolutely correct. That's something that should be done. The second thing that he brought up was in terms of the propriety of the complaining witness appearing before the ABC and all these people. Well, that's certainly improper. I mean, because one is unprecedented. No lawyer is going to let a client, prior to a trial, to start conducting interviews. In fact, I wouldn't let it happen at all. All right? So, I mean, that's the bottom line. That's the reason why with the Warner Brothers, I've never allowed a client to do that. Because you're opening up for the other side. And that's basically what has happened here. But you see, on the other hand, I suspect that Ms. Diallo has said, this case is really going bad. And I got to see it for myself. And that's the reason why our community has come involved. Because it is not about Ms. Diallo. Ms. Diallo may have been the victim, but she wasn't the target. Right. And that's something different. Right. Okay? Right. All right? That's where we come in terms of this.
How about recall inside Vance?
Well, the recall issue is something that was litigated. Vanity B over in Brooklyn brought it up in terms of Mayor Koch, and the courts are not happy with the idea of recalls. So, basically what I'm saying is they do not believe that the way that the electoral process exists in New York give rise to recalls.
All right. Next caller. Welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from?
Good afternoon. This is Robert calling from the Matrix of Harlem.
Okay, quick question or comment for our guests?
Yes. My question is, I just want to know if is there any law or rule that can make man go forward with the prosecution of this case?
Okay. All right. Thank you for your call, caller.
Thank you.
Well, as I said before, Yeah, I think the law clearly requires him to go forward. What you probably are more appropriately asking is, what remedies might be available to compel him to go forward? And I think that there are two things that have to be done in the nature of Article 78 proceeding in state court, and that is in the nature of a written prohibition, which says to the extent that he is acting now, he's acting in excess of his authority, and also that he is mandated under a writ of mandamus to carry out his functions as a constitutional officer. So the answer is yes, but it may take a little prodding from us to make it happen. I mean, it's not like the law just going to be there and say, okay, get up and do it.
Right.
But what the question more appropriate is, what remedies do we have? And I think on a state level, it's a writ of mandamus and a writ of prohibition.
All right. Next caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from?
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Harlem.
Okay, good question, comment.
Just a quick question. Just what Mr. Maddox was saying. I believe I heard that the date has been moved now from the 1st to the 23rd. And I'd like Mr. Maddox to explain how this is going to affect if they continue to try to drag this out and assassinate this woman's character.
All right, thank you for your call.
Well, I think that for us, that if it's moved from the August 1st to August 3rd, you know, I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
I think that for us, it gives us time to now reload. And I know one of the things that I want to do this weekend on Sunday is to prepare by that time some written authority in terms of what we need to be going as a community. And since we were already going to be upstate on Family Day, to invite people who want to come up to do so, and to actually have about a 3 or 4 hour seminar while we're up there to actually deal with the issue, because the only way we're going to win this fight is to first of all make sure that we're not casualties of propaganda. And the only way you make sure you're not a casualty of propaganda is get some intelligence. Because they're going to be throwing misinformation, disinformation at you.
Right.
You know, I don't care who you are.
It's already working.
Right, it's already working. So we got to reload, and first of all, develop a mechanism where we clearly know where we stand. We clearly know what is available to us. And so, obviously, if it's been extended from the 1st to August 23rd, then we really have more time on our side. But we got to get busy.
Right.
I mean, even if it had not been, we had to get busy.
Right.
But we clearly have to get busy, because clearly there's some things that are at force now that is obviously showing. And there's a concern that people have all over the nation. People call all over the nation there saying, well, what are y'all doing?
Right.
You know what I mean? People call it internationally. And what are y'all doing? I mean, I don't understand, and this is what bothers me, how we can have a sister come from Africa here, and we can't protect her.
Wow. Well, it's bad, brother, because I know you've been very much involved with the Freedom Retreat, where you train young men and young women in law and social justice and history and so many other things. We talked to various other organizations other than United African Movement, and they were just either nonchalant about it or spoke out against her based on the information and smear campaign. So that's why 100 Blacks in law enforcement, we came out in support of her, because we saw, you know, across the board, Black organizations that were speaking out against her.
Yeah, well, you see, that's the reason why tomorrow night at the Historic Elks Plaza in Brooklyn, we're holding a major rally for her, and to really begin to dissect where we have to go, because this is not a crime against her. This is a crime against all of us, you know, and it is repeatedly happening.
And what's the address?
1068 Fulton. We call it Harriet Tubman in Brooklyn. That's Clapham and Fulton at 7 o'clock, and that's C train to Franklin Avenue. All right, but that's 1068 Fulton.
You need a contact number?
The contact number, yes, is 718-834-9034. 718-834-9034. And there will be additional printed material tomorrow. And even though I like to believe that people would like to come out armed with clipboard and all of that, but that's going to be waiting for tomorrow. The main thing people do is just get out there, you know, and then hopefully we can encourage people to start taking notes later.
All right, 30 seconds. Last phone call. Welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from?
Yes, okay, brother. Max, I know you're busy, but hopefully it won't be so long before your next visit. Quickly, I know that there was like an alternate story. I don't know if anybody caught this, but on the news around the time of the DHK arrest, they did this story about ending the practice of the perp walk. And it just seems like it was no coincidence that they aired that story at around the time that DHK was arrested. And it seems like they've been doing the perp walk with brothers and sisters for decades, and they had no problem with that. But whenever the alleged perpetrator is a high-profile person, all of a sudden it becomes an issue.
All right, brother, we got it. I'm sorry, we got the tail end. No, brother, that's it. We got a lot of phone calls. We're going to get one more before. Perp walk is going to continue to stay customary in the police department, and Police Commissioner Kelly even came out and said it's going to continue. They've always been doing it. Last caller, 20 seconds. Quick question or comment for our phone Maddox. Hello, are you on the air?
Yes, sir.
Quick question, you have 30 seconds.
I know, but I'm trying to find it. How you back?
All right, well, caller, you still there?
No.
Okay, all right, we lost that caller. Last comments?
Listen, the bottom line is that our fight continues. We have to stay focused. And Justin, I love you. If you're watching, and Dad, I love you.
Right.
Just want to commend Brother Maddox for standing so strong. While he's trying to get his license back as we speak, he still dares go out on a ledge and speak out against the powerful Robert Morgenthau as well as Cyrus Vance, very powerful men that have a lot of connections. So, of course, I join in with all those who love and respect the work of Attorney Maddox when I say reinstate Officer Maddox.
And thank you very much. And if people are serious, I'm sure they are. Tomorrow night at the Elks Plaza, 10684 to Harriet Tubman, also in Brooklyn. We'll be there at 7 o'clock. The planning starts now. You can't have a struggle without a plan. The plan starts now. And on Sunday, we'll be going up to Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and then over to Peg Leg Bates to do a real serious seminar at that particular time on this issue.
All right, we'd like to once again thank and all Maddox for coming in and breaking this whole case down. We see you next Tuesday, 5 o'clock. We love you. We thank Nat Woods and Veronica for our producers for the program. See you next Tuesday, 5 o'clock. Tell a friend. Hopefully, all Maddox will surprise and bless us again next week for a current update. But thanks for watching. See you next Tuesday, 5 o'clock. Reinstate Old Maddox, brother. We thank you once again for coming. It's always a pleasure and a blessing to have you here. See you next Tuesday. And Cyrus Vance must go. And reinstate Old Maddox.
I think Old Maddox should take his spot.
Oh, that'd be a blessing.
Last time we thought while the moonlight and music and while I'm romance, let's face the music and dance. Before the fiddlers are fled, before they ask us to pay the bill, and while we still have the chance.